I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, Bidenomics. The White House proposes a new plan to boost the economy. We have team coverage. Controversy on the Hill. 30 Catholic Democrats sign a letter vowing to support abortion. We have a report and reaction. Mission in Moscow. The Vatican's peace envoy arrives in Russia. We have the latest. And when you pray, we'll tell you all about a new book for those longing to deepen their prayer life. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Irenaeus. Our top story tonight, President Joe Biden responds to a question by EWTN News Nightly about abortion. Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama is currently holding up hundreds of Pentagon promotions because he says the Defense Department's abortion policy is against the law and violates the Hyde Amendment by forcing taxpayers to foot the bill for travel-related expenses. So, how did the president react? White House correspondent Owen Jensen has that answer for us. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. As President Joe Biden was heading towards Marine One this morning on his way to Chicago, it was loud out there, of course, with the helicopter and lots of reporters trying to get their question in. I called him over, had to shout my question to him so he could hear. Here's the whole exchange. It lasted about 20 seconds.
Mr. President, Senator Tuberville. Sir, Senator Tuberville is not budging on Pentagon promotions. Senator Tuberville is not budging on Pentagon promotions.
Military. He's not budging, as I understand from my colleagues. Totally inappropriate, outrageous.
But he says the Defense Department should not be paying for abortion travel. Your response?
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Meanwhile, at a fundraiser last night, President Joe Biden lamented Roe v. Wade being overturned, blasted states' pro-life laws, and also said this: I happen to be a practicing Catholic. I'm not big on abortion. But guess what? Roe v. Wade got it right. President Biden was also asked today about the unrest in Russia and to what extent it has weakened Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home. And he has become a bit of a pariah around the world.
It's the second time in as many days as media outlets were quick to point out the president incorrectly referred to the war in Ukraine as the war in Iraq. Just yesterday, a Russian missile strike in Ukraine struck a pizza restaurant, killing at least 11 people and wounding dozens. This morning, the president flew to Chicago, where he unveiled his retooled economic plan he's now calling Bidenomics. The key points include making smart public investments in America, empowering and educating workers to grow the middle class, and promoting competition.
I'm here in Chicago today for the first quarter of the 21st century to talk about the economic vision for this country.
The president adds,
Bidenomics, we're turning this around. We're supporting targeted investments. We're strengthening America's economic security, our national security, our energy security, and our climate security.
But the GOP responds, Bidenomics, higher prices and poor families.
Now, back to Senator Tommy Tuberville for a moment. He says his hold is not affecting military readiness. He said that the other day in an editorial that he wrote. He also says he's not stopping anyone from getting confirmed. And again, he wants the new DOD abortion policy done away with. He says Democrats have to follow the law. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill may be on recess right now, but reaction to President Joe Biden's Bidenomics plan grew swift criticism from Republicans, and many disagree with the president's theory that the economy grows from the middle out and the bottom up and not from the top down. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with more. Eric.
Well, good evening, Tracy. You know, over the last couple of years, President Biden has struggled to sell his economic agenda to the public. While he and his advisors believe the worst effects of inflation are behind us, most Americans are still struggling, living paycheck to paycheck with high food, gas, and energy prices, and believe that the economy is in bad shape. Republicans tell me that President Biden is simply out of touch.
They're paying more for their electricity. They're paying more for their property and casualty insurance. They're paying more for food, as you mentioned. Biden inflation has been crushing the middle class. This administration, mainstream media does not get it.
Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy tells me Americans are seeing the effects of Democrats overspending and a push for green energy. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows grocery prices have increased 20%, energy prices have shot up 36%, and gasoline prices have risen 51%. President Biden has blamed the high costs on the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Democratic leadership stands by his efforts.
House Democrats are focused on kitchen table issues that will grow the middle class. The American people have asked us to work on lowering costs, creating jobs, and defending reproductive freedom.
While President Biden advisors and a number of growing economists believe the worst effects of inflation are behind us, most Americans are still convinced the economy is in bad shape.
When President Biden came into office, we had a 1.4% inflation rate in this country. And of course, it skyrocketed up to 9.1%. It's come down, but, the Federal Reserve is out there talking about raising rates again, and that's going to hurt all Americans.
A new poll finds that only 1 in 3 U.S. adults approve of the president's economic leadership, just 33%. Researchers say it's going to be a tough sell to the American people.
Real wages for the typical family the last 2 years are down by $7,000. We've seen 26 consecutive months of year-over-year real wage declines. That's not happened in my lifetime. It's actually not happened in your lifetime.
There is no doubt that the U.S. economy will be a key issue in the upcoming 2024 presidential election. Now, in the coming days, I'm going to dive deeper into the details of Bidenomics and bring you that report a little bit later. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, joining us now is Amber Athey, Washington editor of The Spectator and author of the book Snowflakes Revolt. Amber, great to see you again. Okay, let's get right to it here and talk about this Bidenomics plan. The President Biden spoke about this afternoon in Chicago, his plan to transform the economy. The name is, as we know, reminiscent of Reaganomics, but not exactly the same thing. Let's talk about that and your thoughts on this plan.
I think Bidenomics would be better branded as Bidenflation because that's primarily what we've seen under this presidency. Biden has been pushing these massive trillion-dollar so-called recovery bills without any acknowledgement that pumping so many dollars into the economy when we already have inflationary pressure is certainly not helping Americans be able to afford these staple goods that they need in order to take care of their families. And Biden is taking credit for the job increases since the end and wrapping down of the pandemic. But the reality, of course, is that these jobs were going to come back no matter who was in office because the economy was eventually reopened. This was not anything to do with presidential policy. And the last jobs report was not the huge success that the Biden administration claimed it to be. The Biden administration, the household survey, rather, found that most of the jobs that were created by Biden, or quote unquote created, were actually second and third jobs being picked up by people who couldn't afford to just get by on one. So Bidenomics might be a catchy campaign slogan, but I think there's plenty of room for Republicans to push back on the policies that he's pushing.
I want to pivot here. A Democratic congresswoman from Connecticut got lambasted on Twitter for what she posted the other day about abortion and the Catholic faith. Representative Rosa DeLauro tweeted in part, quote, "I am Catholic, baptized, raised, and confirmed. The fundamental tenets of my faith compel me to defend a woman's right to access abortion." Amber, help us unpack this one if you can.
There are quite a few Democrats and even a group called Catholics for Choice that have basically warped church teaching into meaning that people get to do whatever they want. And the Catholic Church is very clear on the mortal sin that is abortion. It's a grave sin. They view it as murder, and that couldn't be clearer. It's right there in the catechism. So I don't understand what her argument is here. President Biden has said very similar things about abortion by claiming that even though he personally opposes it, he believes that a woman should have the right to choose and that he's not going to enforce his morality on other people. But again, that's just not consistent with what the Catholic Church teaches. And it's why quite a few bishops have refused to give these Democratic politicians communion because they're not in keeping with the tenets of the church.
Yeah, it is baffling to hear that comment on Twitter. Anyway, staying inside the Beltway in Montgomery County, Maryland, there was a huge rally yesterday outside the headquarters of the Montgomery County County Public Schools. Hundreds of parents were there protesting the district's LGBTQ curriculum and the fact that parents are not allowed to opt out their children of those classes. And this particular issue, it brought parents from just about every race, creed, and color together. Your thoughts on this, Amber?
It really is an interesting crossover event that's been happening in Maryland. We're seeing parents coming from Hindu and Islamic backgrounds joining with Christian parents who object to the fact that schools are teaching their children about LGBTQ topics without their consent. And the left has tried to refer to this as book banning when parents are trying to make sure libraries don't have sexually explicit content in them. They have accused the people who oppose parents not having a say in education of being Christian fascists. And I think this movement in Maryland shows just how wrong this is. This is about parents who have reasonable, real objections to the content that their kids are being exposed to, and they should have a right as parents to be able to have a say in what their kids are learning in school.
Amber, we have about 30 seconds left or so, but I quickly want to get to this. I know you have a new newsletter out called Culture Shock. Tell us more about that and also what else you're following.
Absolutely. This is a weekly newsletter following the biggest stories in our culture, and this week's article is about Georgetown University, a Catholic, the oldest Catholic college in the country, hiring Dr. Anthony Fauci, claiming that his dedication to public service is in line with the Catholic teaching of that college. However, Fauci repeatedly lied to the American people about the pandemic. He did not care for the whole person, cura personalis, as one of Georgetown's slogans reads, when he locked down the country without any concern for how that would affect Americans. And so this hiring, I think, is disgraceful, and Georgetown should be ashamed of itself.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Amber, so great to be with you and get your insights. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
All 30 Catholic Democrats in the House of Representatives vow to support abortion. In the letter signed on the first anniversary of the Dobbs decision, it says, quote, "The fundamental tenets of our Catholic faith, social justice, conscious and religious freedom compel us to defend a woman's right to access abortion." Former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was among those who signed that letter. Meantime, the Catholic Church teaches that all life is sacred from conception until natural death, and that the taking of innocent human life, whether born or unborn, is morally wrong. Well, last night, House lawmakers in Maine voted to expand access to abortion. The new bill would allow abortions up until birth. The state currently bans abortions around 24 weeks. Catholic leaders call the bill immoral. It now heads to the state Senate for a final vote. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including an Irish blessing. We learn more about the ongoing Catholic revival in Ireland and new insight on the rising church attendance in the United States. Envoy arrived in Moscow yesterday amid turmoil in Russia following an attempted coup. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi will meet with presidential aide Yuri Oshokov to discuss the war in Ukraine. A spokesperson for the Kremlin said Moscow highly values the efforts initiated by the Vatican to look for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. More than 500,000 people in Germany left the Catholic Church last year. That is according to the German Bishops' Conference. Reasons for the departures have not been confirmed. The decline comes amid clergy abuse scandals in that country. Well, there is a push to revive Catholic education and the Catholic faith in Ireland, and one school with ties to the United States is leading that charge. A recent story in Detroit Catholic details the work being done at Mater Dei Academy in the city of Cork, Ireland. It was founded in 2020 by a pair of MIT graduates. The school is believed the first of its kind in Ireland. It operates independently of state funding and charges no fees to Irish residents. And we go now to Padraig Cantillon Murphy, co-founder of Mater Dei. So good to be with you. First off, tell us, about the state of the Catholic Church and Catholic education in Ireland and what you found after moving back there in 2010.
Thanks so much for having me, Tracy. So Ireland has undergone a period of unprecedented societal and constitutional change over the past decade in particular. That probably culminated in most people's minds in the referendum of 2018, where the constitutional right to life of the unborn, which had been present in the Irish Constitution for many years, was removed by a majority of 2/3 of the electorate. And that points, I suppose, to a society which is still culturally very much rooted in the Catholic faith and heritage, but has rejected in reality many of the norms that go with what one would have thought Catholic education would instill. And that was a point that was recognized, in fact, immediately following the 2018 referendum. And this didn't come as a surprise to many of us. As you mentioned, when we moved back in 2010, we found we were very disappointed as a couple with young children. We wanted, like every family, the best for our children. We wanted them to be formed in the faith. And what we found instead was a school system which had, unfortunately, in an academic sense, in many instances, slipped into mediocrity. And there are many examples of that. But more concerning for us as Catholic parents was the lack of formation of the children in the faith. And that was a realization that was difficult for me to come to as an Irish Catholic, to say, you know what, these schools that we thought were Catholic, we thought were excellent, I'm not sure they are anymore, unfortunately. And that's what prompted the beginnings of Mater Dei Academy.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about it. I know you say it's the first of its kind in Ireland. Explain that to us.
Yes, so Ireland is very unusual in a European context. Virtually all of the schools in Ireland are public funded schools. So while their patronage, roughly half of the schools at second level or middle high school level are Catholic in their historical ethos, in reality, the delivery of education is controlled by the government. The program of assessment, the examination systems are controlled by the government. The hiring of teachers is controlled by the government. So you can immediately understand that there is the potential for conflict between the constitutional and legislative positions that the government is taking and the positions which Catholics following the doctrine of the Church would be asked to adhere to. And that's exactly where parents like us found ourselves, in a very difficult situation. There were no alternatives because there were no Catholic schools that operated without state funding. And that is what prompted us to look primarily towards the US to see models that we could actually look towards. And while not wanting to replicate in their entirety, we wanted to learn from what was happening here. We also looked very closely at some of the schools in France that have chosen an independent path. And that's what led to the creation of Mater Dei Academy in 2010.
We're almost out of time. We have about a minute left or so. But I'm curious, what's been the reaction to your school in Ireland? I mean, what have you been hearing?
So we've been blessed by great support from our local bishop. The Dominican community in Cork has been very supportive, and we've trebled in size in 3 years. We've run out of space in the building we were in. We've been able to find a new building, and there have been lots of blessings, some persecution as well, but we're growing. There are 2 more schools that have been founded like ours since we began. So there is definitely shoots of hope that perhaps weren't there 5 years ago. We do depend on support from people outside of our parent base, and that's perhaps something that viewers would like to know about.
So, Padraig, tell us more about that and where people can get more information.
So first of all, please remember us in your prayer intentions. The church is dedicated to Our Lady of Knock. We commend it to her protection. We're always looking for young teachers who might like to come to Ireland and to teach in our school. And we've partnered with the Saints and Scholars Foundation here in the US, which is a 501c3 organization based here in the US, which support us in being able to bring teachers from the US, particularly with a classical background, to help us get, hopefully, the first of many of these kind of schools off the ground in Ireland.
Well, it sounds like it would be an incredible experience to anyone, and also incredible for the students. Thank you for what you're doing, Padraig, and sharing all this with us, and we'll be praying for you and your academy.
Thank you, Tracy. God bless you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, The Value of Prayer. Ascension Press releases a new book that will help you strengthen your relationship with God. Plus, Pope Francis honors an Australian saint for her work in Catholic education. Pope Francis held his first Wednesday talk to pilgrims in several weeks, and he used it to praise Catholic education.
Educare e aiutare a pensare bene, a sentire bene.
At his first general audience after surgery, the Holy Father discussed the life of Australian saint Mary MacKillop. The early 20th century saint dedicated her life to serving and educating the poor, opening schools in rural parts of Australia and New Zealand. She was famous for saying that every teacher needs wisdom, patience, and charity. Well, a new survey says church attendance in the United States is improving slightly, but remains below pre-pandemic levels. According to numbers from Gallup, 31% of people say they have attended church or another religious service in person in the past 7 days. That is up 1% from last year and below the 34% pre-pandemic. In the 1990s, church attendance hit a recent high of 43%. A new book written by Dr. Edward Sri examines the value of prayer and its relationship with God. Inspired by the real example of the saints, this new book, titled When You Pray, shows people how to begin their journey of prayer and how to strengthen their relationship with God. The book also takes a look at what God did in the lives of countless saints. Joining us now from Rome is Dr. Edward Sri, author and theologian. Dr. Sri, great to be with you today. Can you tell us more about this new book and how the idea came about?
Oh, I'm so excited. So it's called When You Pray, and it's all about the life of prayer and Catholic spirituality. You know, so many Catholics know that prayer is important. We know it's supposed to be the very heartbeat of our spiritual life. But we're not always sure how to pray. Maybe we're not consistent. Maybe we get distracted. Our prayer feels dry. We feel restless. We don't feel close to God. What do we do in those moments? And how do I allow God to really take me deeper in a friendship with Him and experience the great transformation He wants to do in our soul through my prayer life? So I've been teaching on spiritual theology and the saints and prayer for almost 2 decades, especially with young people. And I've just found that, like, when we can bring the great tradition, the wisdom of the saints, to ordinary Christians like you and me, it really makes people come alive in their spiritual life. And so I wanted to take that very practical wisdom of the saints and apply it to people's ordinary struggles in prayer, but also their hopes and desires to go deeper in friendship with Jesus.
I love that. So relatable. And I know this work, Dr. Sri, is deeply connected to Italy. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we ended up filming here all over Rome in so many different churches, but also even outside of Rome, in Assisi and Siena and Subiaco, where St. Benedict lived for a while. What we wanted to do is give people a visual of where these saints lived. And so many of the great saints and mystics and doctors of the church, they had some connection to Rome. Either they lived here, and this is where they grew in their spiritual life, or they came to Rome, like St. Therese. We got to film where the relic of her habit is. And she came to Rome on pilgrimage as a young girl, so we made the connections into her life here. And then other saints are just buried here. They have relics here, or they have amazing statues here, like the famous Bernini statue of the life of St. Teresa of Avila that's here as well. So we wanted to make the saints come alive, to see their humanness, because I think so many times we put the saints on a high pedestal, as we should, but sometimes we put them on such a high pedestal we forget that they were human. that they were one of us, that they had struggles in prayer, that they had many weaknesses, they had many times where either they doubted or they were in arguments with other people, and God came and met them in their weakness and transformed them with his grace. And what we want to do in the study is show that the same work that God did in all of these saints, he wants to do in ordinary Christians like us.
Cultivating a rich and lasting prayer life is one of the purposes of this book, I know. Can you share with us maybe some practical tips on how to achieve this?
Yeah, some of the key things is just getting started and making sure we have time for prayer every day. And by that, I mean more than just saying some prayers, more than just reciting devotions like the Rosary or Divine Mercy Chaplet, as awesome as those are. I hope we have those in our prayer life. Do we have that time for quiet time with the Lord every day? 15, 20, 30 minutes a day of reading with Scripture, talking to the Lord, listening, Lectio Divina, Ignatian meditation, whatever method you use, but that quiet, intimate conversation with God. That's what we want to have. But one of the biggest things that we highlight throughout are the many struggles that people have in prayer. Sometimes we don't feel close to God. And one of the things we emphasize through St. Catherine of Siena and St. John of the Cross and other great saints is that there's a big difference between faithfulness in prayer and feelings in prayer. It's more important that I'm faithful, that I show up every day in prayer, that I just take that time to be with God, than it is to evaluate my prayer life according to what feelings I have. I feel close to God. I got this insight. I had a good time in prayer. I got some consolation. Those are wonderful moments when God gives those to us, but that's not the measure of someone's spiritual life. It's not how many feelings I have in prayer. The question is, am I faithful each day? It's kind of like in marriage. There's great moments with my wife where we can be on date night. I can look her in the eye. There's those romantic feelings, and it's awesome. But there's many other times where, we're exhausted. We have to wake up in the middle of the night with a baby. We just got to serve, or we have to work through some tension together. This is the ordinary stuff of married life. And the key is, are we still faithful to each other? Love is in the will. It's not in my emotions. It's not in my feelings. To love is to will the good of the other. And that's true with marriage, it's true with family life, it's true with any human relationship. Am I going to be there for the other person? It's the same with our relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, we're going to leave it right there. So wonderful. Dr. Trey, always great to be with you. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thanks so much. God bless.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.